Good morning. My name's Adam, and we're here today for your Wiggling Worms program. While a few more people are joining our stream, I'll give you a little preview. What do you think is in this box? Let's have a look. I'm going to take a closer look myself. Well, I'm being a little silly here, but if you've read the box or had somebody read it to you, it does say live worms. It is a box of worms living in soil. There's adults, kids, and little baby worms in here. You can take a closer look yourself. You can see some soil and newspaper in there, but if you can't see it very well, I can't see any worms at this scale, that's okay. My friend Jill will have some better camera angles for you in a few minutes. During our program today, you can think about how worms move and live. Where have you seen worms before? What were they doing? Well, I think it is time to really get things going this morning. Hello everyone, and welcome to Discovery at Home. For those of you just joining us, my name is Adam, and I'm one of the science educators at the Discovery Center. Today, we're going to learn about some special creatures that live in the soil. We will be learning about red wiggler worms and how to move like them. That's why the name of the program is Wiggling Worms. We'll also do a craft so that we can see how our worm friends move. Now it's time to wiggle on over to Jill to learn more about these worms, take a closer look under the microscope, and set up for your craft. See you soon.
Thanks, Adam, and hi, everyone. My name's Jillian, and I'll be introducing you to a special type of worm today that helps us with composting. These special worms are wigglers because they're a reddish color, and of course, like most worms, they like to wiggle. Our friends help us turn vegetable and fruit scraps into wonderful, nutritious soil for our plants. And FYI, they do that through their poop. So remember, if you're ever handling a worm at home, it's always important that you wash your hands after. We'll get to see our worms in just a minute, but first, let's learn where they live. In nature, worms live under the ground where it's dark, damp, and cool. At the Discovery Center, our worms live inside a bin. Our bin is a solid color to keep the light out so the worms can stay in their nice dark environment. We keep it damp in there by using a squirt bottle to give them a little extra moisture. And we feed them lots of vegetable scraps, their favorite thing being a whole banana. Right now, I gave my worms a bit of a treat. Let's have a look inside the bin. We've got lots of newspaper. That's normal to help keep them damp. Remember, paper comes from trees, so it's also a plant that they can eat. Underneath my paper, I've got a really nice, juicy cucumber. And if you look really close, you can actually see lots of tiny little baby worms getting a nice meal. Inside our bin, our worms are working to create wonderful compost, some great soil, and I can even see some sprouts forming from some of the vegetable scraps, letting us know our soil is pretty nice and healthy. So here's a view of an adult red wiggler. We can see it reaching out forward, trying to navigate its environment. And we actually have a tiny little baby worm there as well. Can you see that? Right there we have a tiny baby worm. It's almost transparent. We can actually see some of the food passing through its little digestive tube. Our adult worm will give us a better view of some of the parts since it's much bigger. We can see that our worms have a mouth end which it's reaching forward with. Scientists call this mouth end the prostomium. You can see it's a little lighter in color, and what that worm is doing is it's actually tasting its environment as it goes. Can you imagine if you had to do that at home? When you walk out to your kitchen, you'd be licking the walls and the floors as you go. Pretty crazy to live like a worm. Worms also have a bum end. Way down along the very tip at the other end is its bum. And it looks like our worm right now is making us some wonderful, nutritious soil right there. If we look all along the worm's body, we notice lots of little lines that are dividing our worm up. We call those little parts along the worm's body its segments. And you can think of those segments like rings of muscles. This is actually what helps our worm move. We can see that our worm is stretching out and squishing up all of those segments. But like us, worms do have muscles, but they don't actually have bones, so their bodies are pretty soft. They use just their muscles to help them move and some tiny, tiny little hairs, which are so small we actually can't see them with our eyes. They're called setae, and they use these little hairs to grab onto the dirt and help them move. Worms also use slime. Did you know they make their own slime? It helps make the tunnels underground nice and slippery to help them slide through. It also helps keep them safe from predators. For example, a bird might want to eat the worm, but if it creates a lot of slime, that tastes pretty bad to the bird, and that little worm might get a second chance to wiggle back away into the ground. Let's imagine for a minute moving like a worm. I brought a piece of dryer vent to help us see it a little bit bigger than our tiny little worms. We talked about its circular muscles or its segments. My dryer vent has lots of rings to represent that. But what we didn't mention is that the worm also has long muscles that stretch from the mouth to the tail. If we imagine this is our worm, we can say this end is the head and this end is the tail. And let's see how they actually move. Well, they'll need those long muscles, those circular muscles, and those tiny little hairs called setae that we talked about earlier. The first step is for the worm to stretch long and thin by squishing all of those circular rings of muscles or segments. Next step is for the worm near its front end to use its tiny little hairs or setae to grab onto the soil. Now it's time for the back end to move. The long muscles are going to squeeze the back end of the worm, making it short and fat. Did you also notice that my worm moved as well? So it's already starting to move head first across my table. The next step is for those setae at the back end to grip onto the soil so the worm can stretch long and thin and extend frontward, tasting the environment as it goes. My worm has now moved quite a bit. If you don't have a piece of dryer vent at home, another way you can imagine moving like a worm is using a slinky. Slinky has all of those nice round rings just like our circular muscles. You can stretch it out like the worm when its segments are squished and use the long muscles to squeeze it up and make your worm move. If you don't have a slinky at home, that's all right. We're going to make a craft really soon that's out of paper. It's very simple and it's a good way to see how our worm can move and practice that at home. Another way we can imagine moving like a worm is by using our bodies. It's going to be a little bit different because we have bones and the worms aren't really very bony creatures at all. They're really soft and squishy. But if you imagine your fingers and your toes are those tiny little hairs called the setae to give you grip, then we can stretch our bodies and squish them up to pretend to move just like a worm. Now that we've learned how red wigglers move, it's time to make our own crafty worm so we can show it off to our friends and family and show them just how the worm moves. You'll need a few things to get started. The first thing is to head on over to our Discovery at Home webpage and print out the worm templates. Here you'll find templates for jumbo and medium worms. No printer? That's all right. You can open up the template and try your best at drawing while looking at it. This worm doesn't have to be perfect. We'll still end up with a great result that's going to be able to move. It's all in the folds. The next few materials you'll need are some craft supplies. You'll need a pair of scissors, some colored pencils, crayons, or markers, whatever you have at home to make your worm nice and colorful. You'll also need some paper, either the template that you've printed out, or a colorful piece of cardstock or construction paper that you can draw your worm on. To get started, the first step is to color in that template. I always like to color in before I cut out, because then I can go outside of the lines and it doesn't matter to my work surface. My table underneath is marker-free. A quick tip, if you want your worm to be colorful on both sides, because you will see the underneath when we fold it later, you'll want to color both sides of your worm before you cut it out. Next step, carefully cut the worm out. Make sure your hand holding the paper is far away from your scissors so your fingers stay safe during your crafting. Now that you've got your worm cut out, it's time to fold. And we're going to fold something called the accordion fold. It sounds pretty fancy, but it's actually quite simple. If we look at our worm, there are lots of solid lines printed all along its body. Those represent the segments of our worm, and this is also where we're going to fold. On the first fold, we're going to fold our paper up, and on the next fold, we'll fold it down. We end up with a nice crinkly version of a worm that's going to be able to squish up and stretch out just like our real worm. Now that you've learned all about how red wigglers move and have all the instructions to do your craft, it's time for me to say goodbye and turn things over to Adam.
Thanks, Jill. I really liked your wiggly worm crafts, and I hope all of you at home watching did too. Those baby worms under the microscope were pretty cool also. If you guys didn't get to see all of what Jill did, you can always rewind now and catch me later, or you can watch Jill's bit later. Now's a chance for you to make your own wiggly worms and play with them to think about how living worms move. If you can't print the template or find paper that you like, you could have an adult help you with something like a cereal box or other recyclable. You could also make something else move like a worm, maybe Play-Doh, pipe cleaners, or anything else that could be wormy. If you're not feeling crafty, or if you're done very quickly with the craft, you can try to move your own body like a worm, like Jill showed you a bit. You could also ask your adult to help you find and take a picture or video of a worm or other little creepy crawly moving around outside. But if you do that, please make sure that you're kind and gentle to those little critters. It's a rainy day, so it might not be the nicest time to go out, but you might see how worms interact in the rain. We'd also love if you asked questions, shared a worm fact that you know, or showed us a picture or video about worm movement. If you have something to share, there are a few ways you can do that, like the question form on our Discovery at Home webpage, through Flipgrid, or our Twitter and Facebook pages. Well, I'm going to get to work on my craft. I hope to see you back at 11. Welcome back to Discovery at Home. If you're just tuning in for the first time now, my name is Adam, and today we are learning about red wiggler worms. We just finished the crafting portion of today, and you are certainly welcome to make your own worm using the templates on our Discovery at Home webpage, like these guys, or using your own ideas. You can also rewind now or later to see some live worms and some more craft info with my friend Jill. But for me, it's now time to have a look at what you viewers have sent in to us. Let's have a look at some great worm craft, fun worm facts, and some garden finds. I'm going to bring you over to my slideshow here, and let's have a look. We've got a couple crafts that people have submitted so far. There's both very artistic and cute looking ones. I really like that guy with the hat. When I see that hat, I think about how worms like to hide from the sun. Because they have that moist, slimy skin, they need sun protection, just like we do. They can get sunburned, and they can get sunburned really easily. So that little hat might help this guy to stay safe in the sun. The other one's really cute with those big googly eyes, and it gives us a chance to talk about something interesting. It's cool that this viewer did that because I had the same thought. So check out what I did during the break here. I took Jill's dryer tubing worm, and I put a little face on it with my own googly eyes. And while it's pretty cute or pretty funny looking, depending on what you think, it's not really realistic. Worms don't have those two eyes like we do, or animals like dogs or cats do. What would be more realistic is if I took a bunch of little ones, a bunch of little eyes, and put them all along the worm. Because instead of nice camera eyes that they have in the front of their heads where they can see pictures like we can, they really have kind of light sensors all along. So they don't see pictures, but they know if they're up in the sun because, like we were talking about the sunburning worm, they can dry out in the sun and they want to go and hide back down. So as it turns out, these two crafts show us two important parts about worm biology. Let's have a look at our next submission here. Our next one is a video of a live worm that somebody's found. Let's play it for you.
Found a big worm, but he has a fat spot on his tummy.
That is
Is he sick?
big looking earthworm. So, and there's also a question in there. The viewer was asking about a fat spot on the tummy. I think what they're talking about is that fat spot that we call the saddle. The saddle is only on adult worms because it's used for reproduction. It's used to make baby worms. So this looks like a big, healthy adult worm. What is next?
I found a big worm.
Next slide. There we go. So I've titled this one Another Live Worm, question mark.
So I went outside and there were no worms to be found. They're all hiding underground from the rain. So here's my little accordion worm, my indoor worm. And I'm going to show you another interpretation.
There you go. You see why I titled that Another Live Worm with the question mark. I was being kind of silly with that dance at the end. So we got a great craft there and a pretty fun little dance. That is very impressive dancing for a human. But could even the best human dancer dance quite like a worm could? Thinking no, because even the best dancer still has bones. You can't be as squishy as a worm. The best dancer, the best gymnast, just can't be as squishy as those worms. So that's a very cool human worm dance from this viewer. Let's have a look at what's up next. Oh, we have our worm in the wild. So somebody got out in the weather today and found a worm. This video is a great time to talk about somebody's question. Whose was this? This was Aiden's. Aiden asked, why do worms come out in the rain? And that is, in heavy rain, their tunnels can get flooded out. And just like us, they need to breathe air. So if things get too wet underground, they'll come up into the air, and that way they can breathe. And because it's nice and wet outside, they don't have to worry about drying out in the sun. So they're all right. They'll come up and surface for some air. I'm going to play this video again because there's another critter in it. If you guys look over here, there's what we call a pill bug or a sow bug or woodlouse. There's a lot of different common names for a lot of creatures, which is one of the reasons that we like to have scientific names for things so we know what we're talking about. This is a different type of animal though. It's not a worm, right? You can see all the little legs. They're kind of funny because they're actually crustaceans. They're related to crabs and lobsters. What else do we have now? Let's see. I have a few questions. Nora asked about types of worms. So why don't I pop back 2 slides and have one of our worms here.
I found a big worm.
There are lots of
but
different
he's
types
a
of
fat
worms.
spot on his tummy.
They're all related and they can live in different environments and have different kind of body types. But the worms that we're looking at today are called earthworms because they live in the ground. The red wigglers that we did the craft on and that you saw with Jill are so good for composting because they really like a bunch of rotten food. They don't tend to burrow deep down into the ground because they want to be up top where all the new food is. So when we feed them bananas or when Jill fed the cucumber to them, you saw they get right in there. They really like that rich food, so they're really good for composting. Our native earthworms are local guys like this.
Found a big worm, but he's a
burrow
fat
down a
spot on
little
his
bit deeper in the
tummy.
ground. You can
Is he
still use
sick?
them for compost, and we certainly do outside, but they aren't as good to keep inside and feed a bunch of direct human food, waste human food too. What else do I have now? So that's perfect. We talked about some other types of worms with Nora, and we talked about Aiden. Waldo asked, so Waldo saw the worm in Jill's video making a new bit of fresh soil there and wondered, does all soil come from worms? Well, soil is a mix of inorganic things, which means not living, so things like rocks. So rocks erode into gravel and erode into sand, and eventually the sand is so fine that it's kind of like a clay. But to make soil, you need to take that and mix it in with a bunch of organic things, living things, decomposing things. So the worms are helping to make that organic part and mix it in with the rock part. But they also get a bunch of help from other decomposers, different microbes and fungi. When you see, say, mushrooms or something on a fallen tree, they're breaking down that dead tree and turning it back into soil. And probably when they do a bit more breaking it down and getting it to the ground, the worms will start doing some more work. So there's a bunch of different critters who help out making soil. Emily also asked me about the lifespan of the red wigglers. When they're doing well, they can live a full 2 years, and I think I remember they kind of go through generations in about 90 days. So you can get new baby worms every 90 days or so. I think that is it for my viewer interaction here. So why don't we head towards wrapping up a bit. Thank you so much for joining us today to learn all about red wiggler worms. I hope you have fun playing with your craft at home and thinking about worms out in the world. You can still share your creations with us on social media using the links in the description below. I'm Adam from the Discovery Center, reminding you to stay curious and wiggly.